How y'all doing? Donald back again with another video, and today it is time for the Linux content. Yay! Uh, so this first video, because I've had a few people ask me about it, I figured I would just kind of give a brief tour of my actual environment. But just kind of like point out what specific programs I'm using to achieve what purpose they serve. Um, Keep in mind, any of these things I'm going to be talking about, I'm not going to go over them in any real detail at all. I'm just going to explain, like, this is what I use, this is why I use it, and maybe just briefly go over like my configuration of said program if there's been any configuring done. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Before we get started, if you've been enjoying my content, you haven't subscribed to my channel, do me a favor, drop me a like, subscribe, and with that being said, let me show you the goods. So we're over at my terminal, and let's just grab like a general summary of my system. I'm going to use a little utility called NeoFetch for this, which will basically show some information like window manager and stuff like that. So we're going to run this, and as you can see, we'll just kind of go over this line by line. I'm running Arch Linux as my distro. Let's see, I'm using Z shell as my terminal shell. The window manager I'm using is called BSPWM. The terminal emulator that I'm using is called Alacrity, and then there's some hardware information. I have like an NVIDIA card. This PC's probably, I built this like, I don't know, five or 6 years ago. So it's getting up there in age a little bit, but it works fine right now. And the color scheme here is not. I did not explicitly set this color scheme. It was generated using a utility called Pywall. I'm gonna make an entirely separate video about Pywall because I think it's super interesting and it's nice for like making everything match up color wise. So and the bar up here and down here below, this is a status bar program called Polybar, and oh, my cat's losing her mind. And the reason why I chose Polybar was it was pretty easy for me to set up, and it also works right out of the box with BSPWM, which is the window manager I'm using. So just to kind of explain very briefly what BSPWM is, it's just a window manager. It's a type called a tiling window manager, and what that means is you'll notice we have a window here. If I open up the window, it just basically just splits it. Oh, that looks awful. Okay, it just splits it like this. And if I open up another window, it just keeps splitting it based on whichever one was active. So yeah, you just keep doing this over and over again until it gets like super tiny, and that's basically what it is. To If you're not familiar with the difference between a window manager and like a full featured desktop environment is, a desktop environment would be something more along the lines of what you usually see when you install something like Ubuntu or what's that called? Mate? Is that what it's called? Mate? I don't know how you pronounce that. And you get like a full environment. So like now Ubuntu, I believe, uses an environment called uh GNOME, however you pronounce that. And there's another distro that's based on Arch called Manjaro, and it has a couple different environments you can install. One's called XFCE, I think that's what it's called. There's another one called KDE. I think you can use GNOME as well. They come with like everything kind of installed, like set up for you. So like, a file manager, things to handle networking, setting up monitors, audio, window managers. This is kind of, you install it and you're ready to go. I kind of built this environment up piecemeal, specifically because this environment is actually ported from a X200 ThinkPad, which, if you know what that is, it's like an 11-year-old laptop, and it's kind of light on resources. So I kind of had to build like a kind of a bare bones environment so that it run pretty good. But I ended up actually liking the environment, so I basically ported the environment over to my desktop and have made some small changes after that. Um, I'll briefly go over my BSPWM configurations. It's not really anything important, really. That's tiny. Open back. Make bigger, please. Make bigger. There we go. Okay, so this is essentially how you configure BSPWM. You send it messages through this little utility it comes with it called BSPC, and this is here as a comment says if I reload the window manager, it won't like double up all these rules that are down at the bottom for certain programs. This what this is doing is specifying on each monitor what what BSPWM calls desktops, what you normally call workspaces, as far as I understand, which workspaces go on each monitor. And that's why, for instance, on the monitor that you see right now, you only see these three workspaces right here. These are basically the workspaces I use because I tend to stick all my like terminal programs in these workspaces. And then on my right hand monitor here, um, I have my browser opens up here. Discord usually opens up in this one. I usually use this workspace for GIMP, and then the video one I usually have like OBS. And when I was actually using visual video editors, they would open up here, like Caden Live or DaVinci. Uh, this is just setting the colors of the things like if you have borders actually on. Normally these windows actually have borders between them, but I have them just straight up turned off. It changes like the colors of the borders, and this stuff's being pulled straight out of I believe XRDB, which means it's all synced up whenever I use Pywall. And this is just some basic like aesthetic stuff. I have gaps turned off. When you open up a new window, how much does it split between the old and the new one? The padding from the top and bottom of the windows. I have these set specifically because I have the um, height of both the top and bottom polybar instances to be the same thing, so they don't like override each other. If you These are just some basic settings for if you full screen. That's what monocle mode is. If you basically full screen a window, does it have a border? No. This is all stuff that's you can look at in the documentation. I have these here so that if I unplug one of my monitors, that the workspaces from the one that's unplugged get um, transferred over to the one that's still plugged in. These so the rules stuff here. This is what will tell BSPWM if certain programs open up, where do they go? So like because by default, when you open up a program, it'll just open up in whatever your active workspace is. But this will say, so for instance, when I open up Discord, it specifically goes straight to the 5th desktop, which is the chat, the one I have labeled chat up above. And you can do other things besides just telling it which desktop to open in. You can have specifically say follow. I think it does this by default anyway. What that means is when the program opens up, like the active window focus shifts to that program. If you have it off, it won't follow it. It'll stay on whatever window you were working on. And I can actually get rid of the Caden Live stuff because I don't use it anymore. And this one, these can fuck off. GIMP, makes GIMP open up in the graphics workspace. Here's a good useful one. So MPV is the video player you've seen me use a lot in all the like the video automation stuff. This is what makes it so that when I start playing a video or something with MPV, it automatically opens up full screen. By default, it doesn't do this, but I want this to look like this, so I don't have to explicitly tell it to be in full screen every time. Screen key. Actually, I need to turn this on whenever I get to the hotkeys. Uh, Screen key is the utility that if you have it turned on, it'll show like what keys I'm typing down as like a little like bar, kind of like sword near the bottom. And if you have BSPWM managing it, it won't go there like that. So you have this manage off man basically saying, hey, don't try to like put this into the same layout. Just let it do whatever the hell it wants to do. And then down at the bottom here, I have this script that's starting up my Polybar instances. So I guess that's probably a good segue to go to the Polybar instances. Now, most of the time when you see Polybar configs, they are kind of all in one file or something like that. I have mine split up. So if we go to, let's see, cd config, Polybar, and we look here, you see I got a couple things here. I have per each bar, it has its own configuration file. And then I have a couple of configuration files that are for specific things. So the colors, the system modules, which is basically be stuff like for BSPWM, for audio, networking, resource tracking, stuff like that. And then system modules are things that have like kind of like specific utility or are powered by scripts. So for example, this little power menu thing up here, this is in the user mode. And this little ghost looking icon down here, this is actually the count of the number of updates I have from Pac-Man. But it's 0 right now because I just did an update before I started doing this. So let's look at one of the Polybar configs. Let's look at the top one. The reason why I have a top and a top right is the Polybar instance that's running on my right hand monitor is very slightly different than the main one on my left. Mostly in that I think I took off the volume and the networking. It just shows the power menu stuff, I think. So we're gonna look at the top one. Okay. This is where I'm kind of including in all of the other configs to use them. A lot of this stuff, actually, I'm gonna be perfectly upfront with you. A lot of this shit, I don't really know exactly what it's for immediately because I yoinked this from like a combination of other places. This is saying to specifically use this in the monitor that's plugged into DisplayPort 3, which would be my left-hand monitor right here, the one that you're looking at. With full width, height 24, which, as I mentioned, matches up with the offsets that I have in the BSPWM config. No offset. Radius, I think, rounds it. Oh, I don't want it rounded. Bottom. If you have bottom set to true, it'll appear on the bottom of the screen, not the top. You'll notice that if when I go to the configuration file for the bottom one, this is set to true. This is setting the like background and foreground colors. This little syntax is grabbing a value from the colors configuration that I have defined. I'm not really going to bother showing that because literally all it is just me grabbing all the colors from like the XRDB stuff, which is generated from PyWall again. Let's see, border. That's what's giving like the little line at the very bottom of the bar and defining its color. Padding. I think padding is like the distance between each little module running on Polybar. These are the fonts that I'm using. So the kind of little, I guess, retro-y looking font that's in the in the Polybar instances, that's this TermSyn font. The little glyphs, the little icons, most of that I think is this one right here called CG. By the way, getting it to run by default is kind of the big pain in the ass because I didn't know this, but by default in pretty much any Linux distro that I've encountered, CG is what's called a bitmap font. And by default, bitmap fonts are disabled. Holy shit, that was like 2 days wasted not knowing that, and all you had to do was just enable bitmap fonts, and ta-da, all the shit started to work. This is where you're defining what you actually see in Polybar. So this is modules left means these appear on the left hand side, module center, the middle, module right, the right hand side. And these are being pulled in from mostly these system modules. This just displays what the active window name is. You'll see that there right now in the top left hand corner. I'm looking at this Polybar config. This is the BSPWM module that will highlight which workspace you're working in. And then the right hand side, the pulse audio module is showing the whether it's muted and what the volume level is. This is your Ethernet stuff. This is what's showing the little computer monitor or little networking glyph with the my local IP address. Date is what's showing the time up there with the clock, and power menu is what's showing and controlling the little power menu button in the top right hand part right there. Yeah. Cursor click. If you're mousing on something that you can actually click on, it'll actually change it to be like a clickable looking button. So you'll see that when I'm on the BSPWM workspaces, you can actually click on them to change them, and that's why they changed that. Cursor scroll. I don't really know what that does. Again, a lot of stuff is kind of yoinked from other places. So that's the top one. The bottom one looks almost exactly the same, with the exception of it. That's not how you spell bottom. With the exception of it has bottom set to true, and it has different modules. So this MPD module, MPD is like a little music player daemon, and this just shows like if there's a song playing, what's playing, and you can kind of control it. That's what this stuff down here in the bottom left hand corner is. File system, this is what you can use to display like how much space is being used on certain directories. I think right now I haven't really changed this. I need to change it. It's just showing the use of my like root directory. I need to change this to my home directory because making all these YouTube videos is starting to shit on my hard drive space. Memory is showing how much RAM is being used at the moment. CPU shows how much CPU is being utilized, and packages is that little script I wrote that counts the number of Pac-Man updates I have. And there's also a tray. So you know how a lot of times in desktop environments, when you have certain things running, they'll have like little icons displayed that you can interact with in the bottom right hand corner. Well, I actually have this. You can use this in Polybar too. You don't see it right now because I have this. I guess if you have it turned on for multiple ones, it goes all the way to like the farthest one. So there's actually an OBS icon visible to me, but it's on the other monitor that you can't see right now. And yeah, that's it. Otherwise, it's almost the exact same config as the top one. What else? Hotkeys. Yeah, so let me turn on screen key real quick. Yeah, okay. Clear. So the interesting thing about BSPWM is it does not have a way built into itself to define its own hotkeys. You have to use a separate hotkey daemon to do that, and the hotkey daemon that I don't remember if it's like they were built together or they just like natively kind of work with each other. Is called this is hard to pronounce, SXHKD, which stands for like Simple X Hotkey Daemon. And I'll show you that config too, and I'll let you know ahead of time that this is more or less the like default config for it, with like minor changes. So this is what's mapping all the key presses to do different things, and you'll notice a lot of them again use that little command like message utility that interacts with BSPWM called a BSPC. I'm just going to go over the stuff that I specifically changed, or at least I'm pretty sure that changed. Otherwise, the rest of this is like literally the default config that comes with it when you install it. So super return. I don't remember if this explicitly has a program in it by default. I have it set to just start an instance of whatever the default terminal is that I've defined in my environment variables. If I go down to 8. So I have 2 separate groupings to launch common programs that I use. And you'll notice there's two separate groups. One's for basically GUI programs, and one is for terminal programs. Um, the reason for this is you have to launch the terminal programs in a slightly different way to kind of make them behave the way you'd want them to when you launch them this way. And this syntax may look a little weird. So this is basically kind of like a key value pair sort of. So you notice that there's there's 6 entries here, and then down below there's also 6 entries. These map one to one. So you'll see if I press I have it mapped so if I press super control and then B, it will open up whatever I have as the default browser. If I hit super control D, it opens up Discord. Super control G is GIMP. And I also have K for Kdenlive and V for Resolve, which I can actually delete those because I installed these. Go away. Okay. And then O is OBS. And for terminal programs, if you're confused as to what this is, so when you launch a terminal program, most of the terminal emulators that I've used, you can pass in this like -E flag, and what that'll do is it'll start up an instance of your terminal with this program started, and then when the program exits, it just closes the terminal, which is basically the way I want this to behave. And the way I have this set up is it'll launch my terminal file manager, which I think I have it right now set to LF, which is like a file manager written in Go. Reader is like for EPUBs or ebooks, PDFs, and I believe right now that's set to a Vim-like reader called Zathura. Zathura, I think that's how you pronounce it. This is MCMPCPP. Don't you love these like little program names? This is like a terminal interface to interact with that music player daemon program I mentioned. CalCurse is a terminal-based calendar. I don't use it very much. I should use it a hell of a lot more than what I do. YouTube Viewer is a way to watch YouTube videos without going on YouTube. I don't use this much. I just have it installed. Twitchy is kind of like YouTube Viewer, but for Twitch. And SPT is a terminal interface for your Spotify account if you have premium. I actually made a separate video a very long time ago that actually showed how to set up both SPT and the streaming daemon called spotify-tui. And that's the only thing I'm really going to go over because everything else in here is like the default. If you want to look into that more, you can do that at your leisure. What else? I guess my ZSH stuff would be interesting. So let me open up ZSH. If this file looks familiar, I installed it through what's that like little wrapper called Oh My ZSH, which is basically just like a plugin wrapper kind of. There's nothing real. I haven't. You'll notice I don't have a theme set here. That will be made more obvious why I don't down below. So we're gonna kind of go through here. Plugins. The two that I have installed that aren't here by default is this auto suggestions and the syntax highlighting. So you'll see if I move my no, you can see it. If I start typing something, you'll see that there's kind of like an a suggested auto completion there. And if I hit Control Enter, it'll actually autocomplete whatever it was that it had on there. And then you'll notice that the syntax highlighting was changing as I was typing. So if I give it something that you can actually run, like SPT, it'll actually show up as being like a valid command. Otherwise, it's kind of weird to tell on my color scheme. But if it was like a normal color scheme, it'd probably be like red or something. What else? Okay, yeah. So here's a bunch of like environment variable stuff. This is like the history file to track all the commands you've entered. Fuck this stupid beep thing that was more relevant on my ThinkPad. This loads up my virtual env wrapper script if I have it installed on the system. So this one's probably a little weird. So of all the terminal emulators that I've used, URXVT is the only one that will actually grab your color scheme straight from XRDB, but pretty much any single other one that I've used doesn't do that. In order for the color scheme generated from Pywall to be used, all you have to do is just cat out to this file that's generated by Pywall, and that's how I get the color scheme to show up even in Alacrity. Go down. So let me turn screen key off quick. I don't need it on right now. So auto CD. What auto CD does is whenever you're in a directory, instead of having this like type CD blah 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 the name of the directory, you can just type in the name of the directory and it'll just automatically CD into it without you having to put CD every time. It's kind of it's like a minor time save, but when you're doing it a lot, it helps. This is me adding the local path I have with all those scripts you see me write for doing like the automated video editing stuff. That's just adding those to the path so they can be found in the terminal. This is adding yarn, the globally installed yarn executables in there if yarn's present. Rust path, Dino path. I'll show you my aliases. Those are probably relevant. There's functions, but I don't have any. There's no functions in there. This used to have it so that basically when you'd start an instance of ZSH, it would just print out the stats, but that was kind of like a dumb gimmick, and I don't really do it anymore. This is for some little utility that I think DistroTube talked about, which is kind of like a utility written in Rust to like explore your file system kind of and search it. I think this is what actually lets you I think this is what lets you hit like control enter to take the auto suggestion and actually use it as the command. So this is why I don't have a theme right here is I use this prompt called Starship, and it has a bunch of stuff built into it where like if you're in a Git directory, it shows you what branch you're on and like whether you have changes and stuff based on icons. It'll also pick up if you have certain files in your directory to determine like whether this is a Node.js project or this is a Rust project, etc., etc. To show like some things like what version is it that you're using and some versions about the project itself. This is Starship's written in Rust, and Starship is actually based on another prompt that I think Brody Robertson talked about called Spaceship, with the exception of I think Spaceship is ZSH specific, where Starship is actually can be used in quite a few things. You can even use it in Windows PowerShell. God forbid you're using Windows. So that's all the ZSH config. I'll show you the aliases. I think. Forgot what my thing was to look at aliases. V config. Oops. I'm already in config, you fucking genius. Config, ZSH, aliases. Yeah. So most of this is just convenience aliases to get to configuration stuff. This I have like NeoVim just mapped to V, so I can just do V file name to open up in Vim or NeoVim. SV is the sudo vim to open up with sudo in case it's like a system file. This is to do this little approach I saw on I think the Arch Linux wiki about how to do like managing your dot files. You'd have to go look that up. Just get aliases, quick ways to go to certain folders I go to frequently. There are certain configs that I tend to touch them frequently enough that I just made an alias that'll just automatically open up the config in Vim. And these are all Polybar configs. This is Dunst config. Dunst is a notification daemon. If you've seen some of my videos and like maybe you've randomly seen like a boop, like a little blue box appear in the top right hand corner, that's a Dunst notification. The BSP config, the hotkey config, ZSH config, NeoVim and Vim configs, the X resources folder, X resources. I have it too. I actually have a thing up here to X up will take whatever the current version of the X resources file is and merge it in with the XRDB. This is in case I've manually made changes and I want to update the XRDB. That's how I do that. Trying to think what else would be interesting to see, because I already covered window manager, status bar, shell. Um, I guess that's it really. Um, I am going to do a more in-depth video about Pywall to do the color configuration, because you can actually do some pretty you can get some pretty nice looking setups with basically just using Pywall to kind of make everything color sync together, which is really nice. So I think that's all I got for this video for now. If you enjoyed the video, if you found any of this interesting, drop me a like, subscribe, comment if you have any questions about any of the stuff. Any of the stuff that I talked about in this video, I'll try to remember to put links to them down below in the description. So like BSPWM and Polybar specifically. I think I have all my dot files in the Git repo, and I'll link that down below as well. Starting going forward, uh, if you want to follow me on social media or just chat with me somewhere else, I have those down below as well. If you want to support the channel, which would be amazing, by the way, there's links down there below to do that as well. And with that, y'all come on back now, and I'll see you next time.